others have verified this too, is like it's a very insular culture. Like you're part of this family, you're part of this group, and it's almost like really hard to remove yourself from it at times. It's like you feel like you've left something, a part of you, when you leave. At least I did.
Yeah, blood in, blood out. We're live.
All right.
Actually, I need to do you a sweet intro. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage. Wait, it's not a stage. Well, okay, let me start. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Ben Hernandez.
Hello.
All right. I don't know. That's the first time I've done that. It was probably a bad idea. I don't know. I just was thinking about it when I saw your face.
One of those trumpet sounds. Ba-ba-ba-ba.
Yeah. We need, yeah. That's what Johnny Ham, he would bring that to the show. He would already have it.
I believe it.
It would be annoying. We do need to have him on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really good. Really good. This has been I had 2 days worth of a workshop that I was in, so I'm excited to be doing something else today.
2-day workshops. Those are usually cool, but just so draining.
Yeah.
It's like 1 week jammed into 2 days. It's like
you're exhausted from like listening in some cases.
Yeah, dude. That's the thing. I used to tell my wife, because so she's like, a professional dancer and just dances all day, and they're just, they're being active all day. And I would come home and I would be like, oh God, I'm so exhausted. I don't know if she actually said that or if I just like kind of felt like she was thinking it, but like, why are you bitching? You've been sitting around on the computer all day.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you don't get it.
It's not. This is an in-person one, which I think is a whole other layer of exhaustion. Or
that's
out
true,
of practice,
but better though. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, so
I mean,
been
for
the
me,
first one in person in a while.
We've done a few, but for me, it's and I think this is very apropos of what we've talked about on this episode, or we're going to talk about. But I get exhausted being around people. I have this like show, this song and dance that I feel like I have to put on when I'm around.
Oh
folks.
Yeah. 100%. Well, dude, look at that sweet ass transition. So like,
yeah, there it is.
We'll just dive in. So one of your topics that you put on here was public versus work persona, well, actually you have public work versus private persona. Oh yeah, that's like 3 basically.
Kind of. I think for me the public work one are really similar, but I think there could be some nuance there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty interesting because, I mean, I've definitely... I don't know if I've necessarily... I think when I saw you wrote this, I was like, man, that's a freaking great topic because there's a certain part of me that's like dealt with this, or I don't want to say I thought about it. I mean, I guess I had to think about it because, like, I mean, obviously, anybody listening to the show, like, ever, this isn't the way I would just any client have conversations with. Now we talked about like once we get to know clients and shit like that, like at least back in the day, I think once you become a little too corporate or whatever, you probably just need to, stay in safe mode all the time. But yeah, there's a different, you're not just yourself all the time in front of, clients or even around just at the office, I guess.
Well, I think back to even, when I first started doing my very first management consulting gig, and it was in a particularly like buttoned up organization where the expectation was this explicit, always professional. You go through a class called Dress for Success, and
that's right.
It became this interesting thing where I was part of like the early team that started a UX practice there, and they'd never had designers. They'd always had engineers and management consultants. And we kind of had to like redefine culture a bit for us because the guy who was leading our practice was like, my team is not going to wear pleated khakis every day to work.
Right.
On casual Friday. Right. Like there was the culture of you wear a suit to the interview and other things like that. But also there was the like know when to speak when you're talking to a client. And like there was this layer of like stress added to professionalism around how you interact with people. So I think that for me, honestly, like I had some of that already, but it kind of cemented it in a different way when I started working there. And then obviously since leaving there, I've had other perspectives and other views, but some of it persists. I think it's just ingrained in me.
Well, some of it, I mean, so when you say some of it, you're talking about your presentable self, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's the self-filtering is how I would describe it.
Yeah, which is
as I've
which
heard
is
others call
smart.
it the flap. Sometimes has to be
Whoa,
adjusted.
wait a minute. What does that like stand for?
Just the
Fuck
saying the word
or-
"fuck" in certain
Yeah,
settings
it's
is
just
maybe
not
not
saying
always
it.
appropriate.
I don't know about that.
We described it as the fuff flap at
fuff
that
flap.
company, and it was just like a thing where we would like joke about it. It's like, it got loose on that meeting.
The fuff flap. That sounds kind of gross, but all right.
It kind of is.
Well, the
gross.
funny thing is, the place that you were at, they were also kind of like very, I don't know the right way to put it. They were kind of outwardly religious or whatever. Like,
Oh my god!
like
No pun intended.
Yeah, to the extreme. That's pretty funny. To the extreme, though, like, right? Like, didn't they ask? I mean, I don't know if this was your interview. You don't have to give away anything here, but
No.
I have heard that they will ask you about your about that stuff in your interview.
Oh my god! Yeah, I mean, it's definitely.
Isn't that
I would
like
say-
supposed to be like maybe against the law or something?
I think there's some legalities there. I mean, it was no secret that there were people in leadership that maybe had very outward expectations about who they hired from a religious perspective and a faith perspective, and that became problematic eventually. And let's just say that they've had some leadership changes since they were acquired recently, and because of that,
Oh yeah.
I think there's stories that always come out of like, oh, this is what it used to be like. Wow, I can't imagine that you would ask somebody, the CEO of a company would ask somebody in a final interview what their faith journey was. Just seems like a weird thing to ask in an interview process for a company that has nothing to do with religion.
Well, right. Well, okay. So like that, interestingly, like I'm okay with sort of. I'm like, I'm only okay with like it being a question. I guess I'm not okay with it like, well, here's the deal. As long as you're going to be very public about, it's like going to work for a church or something.
Sure.
And you're
sure.
like, they're like, no, I don't believe in God. Can I have a job here? And they're like, well, we're probably going to let Susie have this role because she's, but I think if in that case, like they're very open about it, which they're probably not allowed to be or whatever, like let's just everybody be on the same page.
Yeah.
You guys give a shit about this and it like determines who you think is valuable in your team. And then like also you can ask a question without legally getting in trouble.
It's and I think that's an interesting perspective on it because I do think it was a little bit of like talking out of two sides of your mouth because to a level
totally.
it was, we are an equal opportunity employer. We hire the best A players, no A players. We're going to bring in the right people. And, to be honest, they had some really good people there.
Right.
But some of them were not Judeo-Christian people. And speaking to a lot of them after I worked there for a while, they felt isolated. Some of them were in leadership roles that were being prevented from promotion. And because of that, it became this interesting conversation that I think eventually came to a head with them. But it was like, you're saying one thing, but in actuality, you really mean this other thing.
Yeah, and you're
it was a tricky
to decipher.
Well, and I think talking about like that work versus public persona, that becomes something that for me was like cementing of like, oh, okay. Like it mattered to them that for me there was a time in my life, which just was during that time where I at least outwardly professed to be very active in my faith. And that was like, oh, checkbox. Let's hire this guy.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what it felt like.
Yeah, well, it probably kind of was to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, well, I think it became something
for them.
that...
Or maybe I
like,
misunderstood.
It was criteria for even recruiting, I think, in some cases.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, makes sense.
So I think...
Yeah, no, I mean, so, like, did you understand that, like, from the beginning? I mean, was this like, all right, so did you wear a suit to the interview?
I did not, but
Okay.
I remember one of the things that they encouraged people, they gave people a signing bonus to like get more professional clothes was kind of one of the
Nice.
one of the things they threw out there. But no, I think I was fairly casual in the interview process, which
Yeah.
I appreciate that at least was like accepted through the interview process.
Well, I mean, I imagine that would really fuck up their talent pool. It's like when you get some kid that doesn't know shit yet and he wears his like dad suit to the meeting or whatever.
Yeah.
He's like, this is a thing. I got to wear a suit. And you're like, dude, calm down. Yeah. So, I mean, I assume like most professionals, especially in the design world, aren't really like wearing suits every day, or do they want to wear suits? Now, I will say like I like sometimes, doing that. Like when I worked with Tony and Guy for like 5 years, like we didn't wear suits necessarily. I mean, we did probably more often than most gigs I've had, in my life. But it was like fun. It was like dressing up was like a part of it. It was like, it was a fashion company. So, I mean, I kind of enjoyed it, but like, then you go like where we first met at Intelligent, and it's like the uniform is like cargo shorts and a t-shirt. And I think they even had, there was some website they had. Yeah, flip-flops.
Well, it was like there's a website?
No, there was a website. It was called like I can't remember now, but it had pictures of all the developers.
Yep. No, I know what you're
wearing
talking
white
about.
t-shirts, wrinkly t-shirts and cargo shorts.
Yeah, no, it's like an interesting extreme to think about. I mean, it's having worked at real startups now, I look back on it, the idea of like calling, at least at that point in time, that company Intelligent a startup was interesting, because it was the version of it you get here in Dallas versus like this kind of global idea, but it was much more casual than pretty much any other place I'd ever worked at, which I think from like a culture perspective was that was one piece I put in my mental bank of like, what is company culture? Taking that to other places, it's still very different. Yeah.
So tell me, what are some of the big things like, in terms of like your like private persona. What's interesting is I guess I don't really think about that as much as like a persona, as much as it's like, I feel like the persona, maybe I'm just overthinking the word, but it's like, these are the personas I'm going to fill when I'm in these roles. And when you're at home and you're in private, like there's no persona. It's just,
Yeah, I suppose that's a manner of looking at it. I do think there's still, for me at least, a level of like rising to an expectation that I feel.
Like of your family or whatever? Or
okay. I think the way I would classify it for me, the driving factor is obligation. So I feel obligation to people in my life of varying varieties. Whether it be a positive thing, like I feel obligated to be a good father, a good husband, a good, son to my parents. But I think there is a level also of obligation outwardly that drives this persona of like, if I was just left up to my own devices, what would I be? And do I ever truly allow myself to be that? And the less I like expect myself to do that in certain settings, the more of my real self comes out. Right? Yeah. In both places. And sometimes my real self surprises people because it's very different than maybe what they're used to seeing.
Yeah, you're a screamer.
I'm a screamer. Yeah, you should hear me.
I'm just kidding. Man, I would love to hear that. Well, I mean, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what it kind of boils down to for me is in those expectations that I have, whether I've manufactured them for myself or whether they're true, which that's a whole other topic. I think there is a level of like rising to that occasion. So, I think just to kind of categorize it, my outward persona could be perceived and has been perceived by others as kind of quieter, reserved, less willing to speak up, and
less combative.
And in some settings that is true. In other settings, I'll use workshops as an example. If I know something and I have a lot of opinions, I'm kind of that guy who's like, actually, I have these ideas, and I'm just like, I need someone to hear them. I want to make sure that they're
going down the wrong path. Yeah.
and I think that's who I am at home mostly.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, honey, I'm gonna cook this for dinner. Sorry, actually, that's
I think tonight. I think there's also this layer of when I'm at home, and I think this is something that's come out more as I led teams, I have to hold people accountable. And I am a much more like stringent, like, hey, you didn't do this, what happened? Frankly, with my wife or with my child, my parents sometimes, than I am sometimes with people that I don't have a familial relationship with.
Yeah. That's interesting. But I mean, how long have you been married now? Like 10?
It will be 14 years.
14 years.
This
Man.
year.
Well, yeah. So like, your family knows you. They know how to engage with you and interact.
There's a security there,
My wife
right?
would backhand me if I talked to her that way.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen, by the way. I think it's just much more comfortable.
You say it while walking into it. Like, this didn't get done. What happened? Okay, go ahead. Let's carry on. Well, it's funny because actually now that I was sort of thinking about like this idea of the private, persona, I was actually even kind of thinking like, is there, well, tell me if this is, if this resonates for you, but there's also for me this like version of me that I want to be.
Yeah.
And then there's the like fucking super lazy version of me, which like sometimes I want that guy to have a chance, but anytime like super lazy me, like sitting on the couch and watching TV because like, the wife and kids and everybody's out of the house, immediately like the guy who's like, don't be a loser. It's like there's shit to get done, which there's always shit to get done. And so like, but I do also think like, I do want to get shit done and I do want to, be better. And I don't know if there's maybe something in that, like seeing people that are always like, it's like comparing yourself to like losers, right? You're like, fuck, I don't want to be a loser. And so like, there's this idea of what not being a loser looks like to you for yourself. And you're like, all right, that's the persona I'm going to, sort of put on even when I'm like alone.
I think we're probably like most of us are harder on ourselves than we should be, right? Like it's this idea of like, oh, I guess I am that loser when maybe outwardly no one really sees it that way. Yeah,
yeah, totally. Or like even like maybe even if you don't think you are that loser, it's like if you relax for any minute, like that's I think what gets me. Like I have trouble just like, well, so here's an example, and I've told my wife this, and she's like, that's not true, but like so like. If she's like, I come home and she's like watching TV or something and I don't care, like, that's cool. Yeah. And sometimes I'll go like do a thing, like, wash the dishes because there's a couple there. And that doesn't mean I need her to get up and start doing chores or something. It's just, but in my head, if I'm the one that's on the couch and she walks in, starts washing a couple of dishes, I'll be like, fuck, I got to get up and start doing work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I feel like I'm like
obligation.
Hey, you got to get to work. Yeah, I'm working. Obligated. You're working.
Yeah,
it sucks.
I'm curious, Steve, from your perspective, because I think I've identified a third persona for me. Okay. Do you have a persona that is different than your other personas, where you're at a party or you're at a conference or whatever, and you are in the mode of like, let's connect people, let's meet people, let's be the life of the party?
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like you're, leading me with that question.
Well, I'm saying I have.
It's true.
I actually have one, which is hard for some people to believe.
Yeah, I'd have to think. We've been to some shindigs together. I can't.
Yeah.
I'd have to think about that for you, but I feel like mine. I mean, at least there's probably still some of it that exists, but it's like the wild and crazy Steve.
This is an interesting one that I think I've discovered for myself as of the past 5 years or so. Going to enough conferences by myself with no one that I know. I would. Let's call this persona Dan Fernandez. It comes out when I am in a mode of like I have nothing to lose socially and everything to gain. Whether it be like make business connections, whether it be just like create a network of people at this thing that I don't know. And on many occasions, it's actually very enjoyable to me. And unlike other settings where it drains me, it's very fulfilling to be like, all right, I want to go in here and be the connector of everybody in my circle and then grow that circle over the course of the next 3 days. I've done that probably 3 times in the past 5 years, and it's been every single time just exactly like that.
That's interesting that's not draining. It makes me think it's because you're not like having to like you don't, well, you just said it. You've got nothing to lose. So maybe
Yeah.
you're kind of like allowing yourself to be yourself a little bit more.
There you go. No,
Yeah.
I will tell you, and I think you and I have talked about this over the years, right? Like, I have a lot of the social space that I fill in a lot of team settings or in a lot of friend groups or dynamics is oftentimes a supporting one.
Right.
I'm like that number two like person that kind of you go like, hey, Ben can handle this, and I'll take care of this part. And and I continue in my life to find myself in situations where I tend to fall into that role. But when I can be the one leading a conversation or the one pushing the direction of things and hey, let's bring this person who's sitting by themselves in a corner into the conversation.
Yeah.
That's super energizing for me. I've done that a
Yeah.
couple times with my at events with my wife. And interestingly, she's an extrovert for the most part, but she hates these settings. I love these settings.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I love it. I mean, I'm very much like that in those types of like, drop me off somewhere alone, like no big deal. I think maybe like, I don't know for sure if I need like one cocktail, but one cocktail like good is like even better. It's like, I've never really minded walking up to the group of bros standing together like they've already got their own group and being like, "What's up, dudes?"
Yeah,
and just, I don't know, almost like an idiot, like the clueless idiot. And then, but I've never had anyone. I mean, I'm sure somebody's probably rolled their eyes at me or whatever, but I've never been like, "Sorry, bro, you can't be a part of this conversation." I even like early on went up and told this guy like at one of the first conferences I ever went to, and Twitter was like brand new, and I went up and walked up to a group of guys and was like, "Hey, what's up, guys?" And they're like, "Hey, what's up?" And I was like, "I'm Steve." And one of the guys said his name, and I was like, "Oh, dude, we're friends on Twitter." And like I kind of got a little bit of the eye roll, and I was like, "Whatever. I mean, we're all nerds here. Come on."
Yeah. I think there's something about that, right? That I don't know you personally, and I'm just gonna like take that social risk to jump in.
Yeah, and it usually pays off.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'll tell you, I think for me, as somebody who grew up, and for the most part, being categorized as a shy kid, and having like a lot of social anxiety, I think the idea of like all strings removed, all barriers out of the way is very freeing. And I think for a lot of people, if they really ask themselves, like that can be really freeing, but it's kind of terrifying for some people as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like just the idea of like kind of letting your guard down.
Yeah.
Like, what is it for everybody? That's like relative. So like, uncomfortable to let your guard down, especially for like people that, I find it interesting that you like, I hadn't really heard you talk about this before, but the fact that you do well, like because you're not an extrovert, but I've never thought you were like terribly like, oh God, or anything like that. But like you definitely like, I think I think it's kind of fair to say I'm kind of I don't know if I'm extreme, but I'm definitely more on the extreme side of extrovert. But no, I think that's interesting, and I think you figured it out. Like, it's like, all right, well, the reason that I'm partly an introvert in certain settings is because people know who I am. Yeah. And there's this idea of me that I need to sort of fulfill in this sort of setting. And then when it's like a blank slate, it's like, fuck it. Like, I'm here, nothing to lose. I'm not going to waste time or energy.
I completely agree. I think there's also a cost-benefit analysis. I've also thought about this because I think there's a cost-benefit analysis of the cost is I put myself out there a little bit and act like a normal human around people versus being, self-contained, quiet, and keeping to myself the entire time, and ultimately get nothing out of the situation when I could gain connections, I could gain a job, I could gain business opportunity. That to me is where it boils down to. And I'm, it's like I'm not an inherently competitive person. I can remember a couple times, I forget in what context, you and I, when we were working at our previous company together, having a conversation with the CEO and him being like very surprised that I didn't view myself as competitive or didn't care about being competitive. And I was like, I don't care about frivolous things. I care about important things that matter.
Yeah.
And that competitiveness only comes out when it's something that's like, this deeply matters to me. Being connected matters to me. Not winning like a silly game. And I think that's always been my, like, I'm serious, and the word serious from many angles describes me, and that's one of them. I'm serious about my own, like, opportunities.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think I mean, I can see this idea of you being, competitive just in life, like, but it's almost like competitive, like with yourself. Maybe it's like, at the end of the day, years from now, you don't want to look at yourself and be like, oh, fucking how weak was that performance? You're like, it's like you're competing with the idea of like who you want to be. Like, I don't know. I love thinking about that kind of stuff though, because it's like, you have to figure out ways to motivate yourself too. And I think competitive or whatever, I mean, sometimes like you and I have gotten competitive on projects where it's like we want to fucking, win a deal or whatever. And we've pulled some long hours. But I mean, like you were saying, like if we were going to go play ping pong or something, you're like, that was fun, whatever.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of like thinking about, this idea of who you want to be and like competing with yourself in order to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
Because you definitely can't do that. Like, you can't do that if every day your MO is like fucking sitting on the couch. Yeah. And it's like, which is hard. So like, I guess kind of like, I don't know, you're always like psychologically like a few steps ahead of me. I'm figuring it out. I think it's like difficult. Like this is difficult. Like just you being the you want to be. It is like actually takes effort. Like
it does, yeah.
It's because like just being a fucking lazy piece of shit requires no effort, but you're not even you're going to be the version of you don't want to be, and it's going to compound over time the more you do that, right?
So I want to hone in on something you just said because I think it's an important detail. I think there's also this layer of being the version of who you are that you want to be, and there's also the version of the person that you are that you need to be. And sometimes we hold ourselves to this crazy standard that's unrealistic. And it's interesting because I think then it does sort of like go to that negative self-talk place sometimes. And I think that acceptance and like acknowledgement and maybe even understanding of what is that needed version of self in a certain setting, that can be super freeing. I think just an example I'll pull from is like, as a leader of people, like thinking about like, is the expectation that I do everything right all of the time, that I have all of the answers? Or is it okay to sometimes be like, I don't know, but good thing I surrounded myself with really smart people that I hired that I really trust and I can go to? Like, part of it, I think, I will quote somebody on my team, one of my managers who actually said this to me the other day, which I think was really profound. It was, I just realized that a good chunk of your job as a manager is to be comfortable looking like an idiot in front of your direct reports from time to time. I was like, that's true. But it's also, I've never heard it put quite that way. And it's an interesting observation because you do have to be confident enough to be like, I got that wrong. Let's all work together to get that right next time. You're part of this solution. Yeah,
I think there's a lot to unpack there. And part of it is even like the idea of, we'll use us real quick. Like, I mean, like you reported to me, but there's shit that you could do that, there's shit you could do I couldn't do. There's shit you could do that I didn't need to do. Like there's a whole mix of those types of scenarios. And so there's also the version of like where, maybe I'm the lead on a project and I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, maybe I had an idea and I could just be like, yeah, let's do it like this. But then you're like, great. Now I'm doing Steve's vision. Or maybe we just have like a conversation and, honestly, like, I don't have all the answers, but, there's then the inclusion. I guess kind of what I'm getting at is like, as a leader, there's that old school version, which just tells you what to do. Yeah. And then there's like a better version of that, which includes you. And actually, since you're going to be the one executing, lets you kind of lead. And then they just kind of like give you like feedback or help you course correct.
Yeah. It's a fine line.
And then you're not that guy who like figured it all out. You're letting that person figure it out. And you're saying, well, what about if we tried this or whatever?
I agree. And I think that's my preferred mode of operation. I do think that there's like a dark side to that I've seen also play out where someone's kind of abdicating their responsibility. And I think there's a key difference, right? It's you're not saying, hey, I don't want to think about this, so you handle it. You're saying, like, let me hear your perspective. If I feel like you have a good handle on it, I'm here for support, but here's your runway to lead this. Like, I think there's a really key distinction there of, like, washing your hands versus, like, watching from afar and being there as a safety net.
Yeah, totally. Well, if I'm to think back to us, I think that line gets kind of blurry sometimes because you got to the point where you were just handling it, and so. And
I think that to me is like also an indicative of like, oh, okay, is there other things, like is this a role, or is this something that could be expanded, or I don't know. It's an interesting opportunity as I see like my own experiences with people that report to me of where they want to grow and take on more responsibility.
Yeah, no, that is an interesting. It's also an interesting conversation because it had like. Then you start getting into just the growth of a company, which there's so many like variables that make that complex. Like when you and I were, running shit, we did need more people, but we hadn't figured out like none of our team. Well, obviously, like, I think you and I are willing to take on a lot more work than we, should at times. And that's like a whole nother topic, but like, it probably took us a long time to ask for something that we needed because we were just like, all right, we can do this. It's as though like we had full ownership of the company and we were trying to save ourselves money, but yet that wasn't the case. We were just like busting our asses to save the company money. And once we finally realized it and started getting more people in, I think, both of our lives got a little bit better.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so that expectation setting for yourself, I think, is really important, and then like being willing to like be realistic with yourself. I think to me has been honestly one of the bigger learning moments in the past couple of years for me. Like really, like as I've grown as a leader and as my team itself has grown and the responsibility has grown, being comfortable like knowing when to say I can't do something, and not being like not beating myself up about saying that, I think is another big part
totally. And that's a huge part of kind of just mentioning like you and me. I think I've talked about it before, but like when I would estimate projects, I would be like, well, I'll do 50%, Ben will do 50%. And you ended up doing more like 80%, if not the whole thing, because I wasn't realistic in terms of like what I was even capable of doing.
Absolutely.
And so I think that is pretty important.
Yeah. I will say kind of as we talk about a few other things, I think a lot of this too boils down to, am I comfortable being that person and hearing feedback from people, giving people feedback for people, and knowing that kind of opens up this persona, this psyche that I have to potential like hurt. And I think that's something that's really interesting as I become more trying to be more of like a vulnerable leader. Like requesting input and feedback is like probably one of the more important things that I've dealt with.
Yeah. Well, you say dealt with, like, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, I truly mean dealt with. I think we, at many companies I've worked at more recently, and certainly the one I'm at now, radical candor, the concept of radical candor, like the book and everything else around the culture of that is a big part of how we run the company. And I think fundamentally, I don't think anybody would argue that being direct with people about feedback and, not hemming and hawing is a good thing. But I do think that there is like a dark side to that as people like don't know how to wield that power in the right way. And I've been the recipient of poor management of that and people not understanding how that lightsaber of power can land for some people. And, I'll be the first to tell you, feedback sucks for me. Like, it's probably my least favorite thing to receive and give as a manager. Like, that is probably like the last thing I like doing on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, I don't think I don't know what most people feel like, but I mean, to me, it wasn't like totally natural. Like one of the first times that, so when Anthony and I had a company before, we hired these very junior designers because we were like learning how to pay people and like how to pay ourselves and just how to run a company. And, there was we got some concepts from one of the designers and it was bad. And I just remember this because it was one of the first times that I worked with a designer that really needed that much, like needed me to tell them, like, you know, when you like do like a radius, a corner, and then you pull it afterwards and it stretches out the radius. Like it had that kind of shit where I was like super heavy-handed. Yeah, this is like junior level, like this is bad even at a junior level. And so I was like, yeah, so, you know, off to an, an okay start. And Anthony was like, yeah, that, this looks like shit. That doesn't look good. You need to make this do this, make this do this, fix those corners. And he probably was like, maybe like a little, like I felt, but here's the thing. In my head, I was like, God, that was so direct. But the designer didn't give a shit. He knew he was junior and he fixed it. And actually he excelled to the point where when he left with us, he went from like, you know, busing freaking restaurants in New York to like getting an offer for more than I ever made at Amazon when we were shutting down the company. Like I was like, whoa, what the fuck? That's cool, dude. Can you hire me? But anyway, point being like, it was like I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And over time, I kind of figured out my own way where, I mean, I use my own tricks that make me feel good. And I also think they make that person feel good. Where it's like, you know, some of the, well, what do you know, if it's like stretched corners, like at that level, it's still probably a different story where I'm like, hey, dude, just FYI, like, what's wrong with these? These don't look good. Like, here's how you don't do that. Yeah. But then, like, if it's like, you know, say it's you and me and you're a totally, you know, qualified designer and I have some opinions and I know, like, I don't know, I just assume in general, like, it's a generalization, but I think there's some truth to it. Like most designers or maybe have some level of sensitivity and it's like, you know, it's a lot different from person to person, but I want to approach that. And so a lot of the times I'll do that with like just the way I'm like, I'll say like, hey, what do you think about, or what if we did, or have you tried, or which maybe people are still like, Steve, you piece of shit, like shut up. But it makes, I think it usually, the history of that experience for me has always been better than just telling somebody this isn't good, you know, fix it or whatever.
I think there's definitely a lot in that, right? I think that I find myself doing similar types of feedback giving. I think the type that's harder for me is when it is a, you know, clearly like corrective moment. And usually things that the person doesn't see. So how they spoke in a moment or something that they did that they had no idea that they were doing. And those are the tough moments. And I think, you know, talking about who the persona I want to create for myself, when someone delivers those types of feedback to me that I had no idea about, that becomes the harder moment where I'm like, oh, I think of myself as self-aware, but I didn't know that in the moment. And it's really hard for me to like backtrack that. So I think when I say dealing with it, it's those types of occasions.
I got you. This isn't like design feedback. This is like performance sort of like critique. Yeah.
And I think it's
that is a next level. That is the next level of difficulty.
Giving yourself also the space to manage up, right? And like being comfortable giving that kind of feedback upwardly is also an interesting lesson that I've had to like grapple with recently.
Well, not only giving it upwardly, but like asking it upwardly, like, you know, like, hey,
absolutely.
Like, proactively, which nobody does that. Nobody like, I don't know why they don't teach that specifically in school. Maybe they do. I don't know. But like, it's not normal. Look, some people do. Like, I think you did, and some people do, but most people don't go like, hey, how can I do, you know, give me, you know, just randomly ask for me to give you like critique of your performance. But when you do, not only like there's so many things that happen with that. One, it's like, as you know, as a whoever your manager is, I don't know, unless they're an idiot, they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like this guy wants to be better. So that's like a one point for you or whatever. That's good for you, for your manager to know that you just want to be better, even if no matter what else. They're like, he actually is asking. So that's a point. The other thing is that it opens it up because nobody really wants to suck. The last thing anybody really wants, look, nobody wants negative feedback, but what nobody wants worse than that is to be the guy that everybody thinks sucks, but nobody will tell him. Like, if I thought that everybody thought I sucked and just everybody was afraid to tell me, that would fucking suck. That would be the worst. Like, just fucking tell me so I can at least have a fighting chance of like improving how much I suck.
It's very true, and I think, you know, there's a kindness in that, right? Like, I think if you think about, like, it's the classic, hey, you have something on your shirt and no one's telling you have something on your shirt. Yeah. But you're the one person who's going to tell that person.
Or the green shit in your teeth.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely like a kindness to that that you're exhibiting by doing that. But I also think it's a risky one in another setting, right? Because there are people that respond negatively to that kind of call out.
Totally.
Because they're embarrassed.
Right.
And that's always like the mental calculus, at least for me, that I always go through of like, oh, do I really want to like engage in that social interaction?
Here's my question for you. Yeah. Does that, in that instance, in your head, are you thinking about somebody who reports to you or somebody that's like, that doesn't necessarily report to you?
I mean, I think it probably happens most commonly in a reporting setting, but I can definitely think of times where I've done it for peers, for example.
Yeah. I think the peer thing is harder because for me, if you report to me and I'm giving you, look, if I'm giving you unsolicited feedback, that's sorry. Like, I'm not doing it I'm not doing it because I want to. That's the weird thing, I think. Not weird. I don't think people take enough time to think about if somebody's giving you, look, some people are just dicks and they just want to talk shit. But for the most part, if somebody is coming to give you feedback, like they're doing it because they actually care and they want you to know a thing that you must not know, because giving feedback sucks. Like, absolutely. Like, as a manager, I feel like it almost sucks worse, you know, having to tell somebody they're like not doing good, or there's an area where they're just, you know, not performing to your expectations. And so when somebody does do that, it's like, okay, it may not feel good, but like, just be open to it. And I think the other thing to recognize is that even if you don't completely agree with it, it is a perspective. It is like somebody feels that way. And even if you don't agree, you at least now have some information of like, oh, some people think this thing. Well, I know that's wrong. So let me make sure that I, you know, speak up enough, or like I do things in a way so people don't think that. It's kind of like you busting your ass all the time, but you never, this is a bad example, but like, say for example, it's like you bust your ass all the time. You wake up at like 5 a.m. and you start working and you work over the weekends. But like Tuesdays and Thursdays, you leave the office at 2:30 because you have to take your kid to swimming lessons or whatever. And then some jackass is like, he's fucking always leaving early. And you're like,
yeah.
All right. Maybe not exactly like the best scenario, but it's like,
I think there's a misunderstanding there though, right? I think that is, if you were to ask me what my biggest fear is, it's being misunderstood.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it goes all the way back down to my childhood, to be honest, as I reflect on it, right? But being misunderstood means my actions are being interpreted in a way that I didn't intend for them to be. And if you think about that, it's a very low control moment. Like, you don't control anyone's perceptions of you. And for somebody who cares a lot about that work public persona and how it's crafted, I think that's where it becomes like, oh man, I have to engage in this and then open myself up to being misunderstood.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Well, and then the whole idea of like, did you ever feel this way? Like, I've definitely had this feeling multiple times throughout my life of like, oh, I'm going to kick ass on this, and I'm going to kick so much ass that it's not going to be a question. I'm not going to need to tell anybody how much ass I kicked. Yeah. And nobody gives a shit about what you're doing, is what you don't recognize. Only you know that you're like slaving to the grind. And so somebody else is just like, cool, Ben did a good job. And you're like, no, hold on. I kicked ass, and it took a lot of effort. Like, you know, I think also you know, the point that you make is like understanding intent, or like, you know, there's this perception. I think there's some responsibility of taking the time as a manager to understand intent as well. or not even as a manager, just as a person. It's like, you know, if you do, I don't know, kind of going down the wormhole here, but it's like, if you perceive something and it's not, you know, in an ideal way, like if somebody said something and you didn't love it, like maybe kind of understanding or trying to at least understand why they said it, and like definitely having that conversation if it doesn't align with like what you know, how you think they should have said something or whatever, but at least like knowing that they are just like not, you know, idiots, or they didn't care, or it's like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, oh, it kind of even is like, why did you make this design decision? Because you were lazy and didn't care? Oh, no, you actually, like, I think it's good to at least, you know, give somebody the benefit of the doubt that their intentions were good.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm getting a little fuzzy here, but it's like, you know, not thinking that somebody, like, if you're,
I think if you assume good.
Assume good, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, yeah. And that way you can at least go into the conversation like not feeling like, all right, you're a piece of shit or whatever.
Well, and I look back at, you know, obviously like I've had some other experiences since you and I worked together, and one of the big ones has been both, you know, interactions I have with direct reports, but also doing various types of managerial training and other things like that, you know, point to some of these interactions. And, you know, I think I felt good about myself for a moment where I was like, oh, based on this training that talks about, you know, asking deblurred questions, meaning like you're asking questions that are intended to clarify, that aren't open-ended and subjective, that aren't accusatory. You can give people a chance to feel not attacked, but like part of the discussion. So for example, if you're like, why did you do that? Like, why is a very like accusatory question versus like, hey, can you talk me through, you know, your thought process on this?
And that's a good one.
It's an interesting one to think about as you start thinking like, how can I choose different words so this doesn't come off that way? And having been somebody who is like overly sensitive most of my life and been the receiver of questions like that and knowing how they make me feel, it makes me super cognizant of that.
Well, I think that specifically is a good takeaway. Like, talk me through how, you know, kind of what you're thinking here.
Yeah.
That's like a similar thinking I was having in terms of like asking the questions of like, you know, what were you thinking? Or actually, that's better.
I don't know what thinking?
Yeah. I don't know what I normally say, but that has the spirit of like what I was getting at. It's like, you know, not saying like, this is wrong, explain yourself. It's like, you know, hey, just walk me through kind of what you were thinking here. Because, I mean, also, not likely if it felt wrong to you, but also maybe there's a chance that you're like, oh, shit. Yeah, actually, that does make sense. Yeah. You know, whether it's a design or it's like a behavior or an action taken, you know, it's like, oh, you said that to so-and-so because you've been waiting on that document for 3 weeks. Oh, that makes more sense. Or some shit, whatever, you know.
And don't get me wrong, there's a definite value in place, and I think I've learned when to use it, of very direct, like, hey, this is problematic, let's do something about it.
Yeah, those suck the worst.
Those suck the worst, but I think it's like knowing when to wield that sword is the art in it, right?
So, yeah, and I think when you start to have a team developing under you, that's when it made it easier for me. Like, I've definitely like had experiences with people that weren't performing to my expectations, but when it was like just, you know, me and them kind of on a thing and nobody else was being affected, like I made the mistake of putting up with it much longer. Yeah. I think once I recognized that it was like impacting other designers that were having to like, you know, take up for how much this person wasn't doing, it was like, okay, hold on. There's a very tangible, you know, side effect of this person. Side effect probably isn't the right word, but like side effect of this person not doing what they're supposed to do is now this person who deserves better, like, is getting worse. Like, they're getting all the shit on them. And that made it, for me, that made it a lot easier to make those kind of hard decisions of like, hey, like, get your shit together. I mean, go somewhere else.
And I'll tell you, like, and this has actually become kind of a litmus test for me with hiring. If I hire somebody who can't take that kind of comment from me, I don't think they're a good fit, right? Like, if I can't be like, hey, this isn't working, and it completely destroys them.
Yeah.
then I think that should be like a reason to not bring somebody on. And how do you figure that out in an interview process? Not always easy, but I think it's something like I always try to like poke at through the interview process.
It's a great point, and that's kind of one of the things I was mentioning earlier is like when I was talking about, is it somebody like a peer or somebody that reports to you? Like, yeah, if it's somebody that reports to you, like you have to listen to it and you have to consider it.
Yeah.
And it's on you what you do with it. But keep in mind, as the person you report to, if you keep not meeting the mark, we're gonna go in different directions at some point. Yep. And so it's up to I think that's also a good just general takeaway is like all these are like data points, whether you're getting it or giving it. Like if you're the receiver, use that as a data point and say, is it worth it for me to change to get what I want out of this, or is it fuck Ben? Like, you don't know what he's talking about. Like,
I'll tell you that. So the last point I'll make on this, because I think it's an important one. I think the biggest lesson I've learned as a manager was the first time I had to fire somebody. And the first time I had to fire somebody, it was me, and I've recently started using this term more, being too paternalistic with them, being too much like, I'm trying to protect you as a father,
Daddy.
kind of a mentality with them. And basically like them not gauging the severity of their lack of performance, because I didn't want them to bear the burden of, this work you're not doing is not meeting the mark. You didn't, the stakeholders aren't happy. Like that built up, and I ended up having to be like almost surprise this person and let them know that they weren't doing it, despite maybe what I kind of had been alluding to in my language.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest learning moment for me when it came to like, here's where directness would have been really, really important.
Totally. And I think I've learned that same lesson because, I mean, you've gotten to see me, try to tell people things, and it's like, you want to be like positive and constructive and all this. But at the end of the day, sometimes I think maybe you give that one go, and if it doesn't work, it's like, hey, just FYI, like, just to be clear, like you're not meeting the mark. Because I've had that same thing where you've told somebody like 3 times and then you're like, hey, you give them a formal warning or something that they have to sign. They're like, whoa, like, I didn't realize I'm really not doing a good job. You're like, yeah, I've literally been telling you you're not doing a good job. Like, and then actually that's another good point. Like at a certain point, even doing like the formal written, like, hey, like this sucks. But like, and that's usually, if I'm to think back correctly, like that's kind of what I will say, like, hey, like this totally sucks, but like this is in order for me to make sure you understand the severity of like what we're dealing with. Like I need you to fix it. Like we're gonna be okay, but you getting this formal document ensures that we are both on the same page.
I think it bleeds into this idea of how friendly do you become with your direct reports.
Yeah, I suck at that.
It's a hard one. It's a really hard one. Well, and I think there's a layer there of like, what is your line that you won't cross? And, I've gotten some advice on this in the past, and not all of which I agree. It's stemmed all the way from, hey, never invite your direct reports over to your house because that crosses a line, all the way to, you can be friendly with them. That means you can be really direct with them. And it's a hard balance because I do think it creates these moments of dilemma. And frankly, like, does maybe cause you to think twice about what you say, what you do, what you need to do in any given moment. So I struggle with that quite a bit because I think it's trying to figure out like people I know well that I can confide in versus people that where I'm like, all right, this is going to be hard if it ever reaches this point. Versus newer employees that maybe I'm like a little bit more intentionally hands off with, at arm's length with, because I know that that's the reality.
Well, there's a couple of things there, and I love this. Like, one, what makes that a lot harder is you get kind of 2 different stories sometimes from in a employer-employee setting where it's like, hey, we all want to like, nobody likes the idea of like this separation of leadership. And so people are like, yeah, we love it. Like, we like when you guys come out and like have a beer with us or whatever. And, then at the same time, you'll get conversations in like the anonymous town hall or whatever. It's like, leadership, they talk too sternly or they joke too much or something. And in this case, I don't know, however it was written, but like, me, and like the team we used to work, we just would talk shit all the time. We'd be like,
yeah,
we're talking about something and we're like, man, you fucking asshole. And then like, if I wasn't getting that kind of interaction, I'd be like, oh, is it my last day? Like, why is everybody so serious? But when people like, that aren't a part of all those leadership conversations, sometimes, I'm generalizing teams here, but like sometimes those folks are like, oh wow, that's too, that language is too hard for me. And like, it's an issue. It's like, well, okay,
yeah,
you're either like hanging out with us or you're not. And so like those kind of things I think make it confusing, but I do also think that like, and I'll shut up, but like the other factor there is, the tiers. Like, when we were working together, when we hung out, we like were friends. It was very linear though. It wasn't like I'm telling you what to do. It's like we were working on stuff as a team. And I think that first layer that reported to me, that's kind of the way it was. But like anyone below that, then it became like, oh, now like I'm their boss's boss or whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't really treat that. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it kind of depends on, then it becomes very individual. It's like, okay, is this person putting themselves in this position that we can have like, a leadership level conversation because they're just mature or whatever, or not, I don't know. It's a little different once you get past that first level, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I think it's an odd place to be when you start finding yourself being more of a figurehead to some people. Which I've experienced more recently, as you think of like people I manage having direct reports, and then one of the things I've tried doing is to maintain some level of connection to the people that I don't directly manage that still report in my organization. Right. So I do a quarterly one-on-one with those people that I don't directly manage, just to have like a time. And it still feels a little bit odd for them, I think, because there's this like aura of like, oh, this is my boss's boss. And that in and of itself feels like a fallacy to me, because I'm like, do you know me? Like,
exactly.
Like it doesn't. I shouldn't be that much of an untouchable in this setting. But I think it's an important context to remember. There's like a weird power dynamic there that occurs. There's all these layers that it creates. And I think as I've grown as a manager and leader of people, I think that acceptance has been something that's been really important, because then it also means that like the things I say and the things I do, probably I should be a little bit more thoughtful about whenever I'm in a larger group of people that I may not interact with on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah, probably wise words.
It's a hard one.
I suck at that.
I don't know that for me I've ever been like fully comfortable with it, but I can definitely think of like my own faux pas in team meetings of like, oh, you don't know me that well, so I can't joke like this. Like this meme I sent on Slack maybe wasn't fully appropriate for everybody in this Slack channel now. Like that's a hard adjustment from small company to big company where
yeah, totally.
Like you all have the same inside jokes and it's all like okay.
Yeah, and you keep adding one by one, and at what point you're like, oh, yeah, there was 4 of us in here, now there's 100. I should probably like chill out. I
mean, our time at is a really interesting example, because it's like the culture there is like unlike any I've ever experienced at any other company. My description, and others have verified this too, is like it's a very insular culture. Like you're part of this family, you're part of this group, and it's almost like really hard to remove yourself from it at times. It's like you feel like you've left something, a part of you, when you leave. At least I did.
Yeah, blood in, blood out.
Yeah, very much, very much. So I think about that, and I'm like, it's that whole idea of like, should a company feel like a family? Should we use the language family about a company or not? I've heard some really interesting perspectives on this.
Oh man, you're opening up a can of worms. How much time do you have? Like we're on an hour.
I guess we are. I do have some time, so this afternoon.
Well, let's dive into this and then we'll wrap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have. I don't know, man. My perspective has changed quite a bit, because I was definitely that like, and I say this a lot, and it probably sounds absurd to some people, but it's like sort of this like idea of a gang, like come join our gang, like, and I almost even like the idea of like we're the outsiders, like come join them. And I like, this isn't like evil. This is Star Trek, but it's like, come, join the dark side, because I felt like we were always looked at like, I don't know. We at least heard a lot of people talk shit, but we were like crushing, which was exactly where I liked to be. I'm like, well, great, you're talking shit, but like it's undeniable, like what we're doing here. So like, fucking bring it on. And then when you start bringing people into the gang, you're like, hey, just FYI, like I'm not just like, this isn't a sales pitch. Everything's different. There's no corporate bullshit. Like we kick ass. We do the work we want to do, and we enjoy ourselves. And enjoying ourselves while doing this is like the top, whatever. Building that whole sort of mentality, and then like you do start to not know what other people do, like outside of your, the company you work with. I think once you've been at a place for a couple of years, you're like, well, this is all I kind of know now. But anyway, kind of getting to your point, like I was all about that, like calling it a family. And now I'm completely against that. It's bullshit.
Yeah, I am too.
Like it is, it's more like your neighborhood. I don't know. Like, and here's the reason why, like, the family thing's bullshit. People want to say it. It makes you feel good. And honestly, like, I think I probably bought into it. But at the end of the day, the only people that aren't family that are family are the people who are like own a huge chunk of the cap table. They're stuck together because they have to figure it out. If you don't even know what your fucking cap table looks like, and you're not on it, like you're actually not part of the family. Because you can be like, if you leave,
you're a part,
or you can be
removed
or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and there's no, like, family can always be like, well, fuck you, I'm part of this family. Like, that doesn't work when you were just an employee of a company. So, like, unless you're a founding member, well, no, not even a founding member, unless your ass is on the cap table, like, you see your name and they can't do shit without you, you're not part of the family. You just work for the family.
And that's it. That's exactly it. And I think that's where I've landed on it as well. I think my realization kind of came around this idea of, like, I am willing to do a lot of things for a family that probably go beyond the job description of a job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if my parents were to ask me to, like, I don't know, dog sit
kill
for
somebody?
2 weeks.
Okay.
We'll see. There's a layer there of like what I'm willing to do for my parents versus if it's like someone I work with is like, hey, can you watch my dog for 2 weeks? Like, no, go board them somewhere. And I think there's a really interesting psychological effect that it had on me. And it was one of those places I've done it even since, where I'm like, I'm bought into this. This is more than a job. I can even remember saying those things to people in interview processes and not realizing just how incredibly toxic that was from a mindset of, I mean, things like, and I think you guys did a podcast about this, like unlimited vacation policies. We all trust you to be adults. Like that idea is such an interesting fallacy because I think for some people, the smart people, in my opinion, they're like, well, you told me unlimited vacation, so I'm going to go take a month off.
Right.
And really, that's not what anybody means, but that's actually, like, if you're talking about being a family, being forgiving of each other, blah, 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 all the things, that is true, but it's actually, like, a lie.
Yeah.
And I view it very much like that. It's like, I don't think that's the same thing.
You're like on Ray's side. No, I'm with you. I understand what you're saying. Well, I think one point you just made that I think is also, like, very interesting is the perception of like your idea of like your part in the family versus like the employer's idea of you in the family.
Yeah.
Like you would go above and beyond to do some shit for somebody because you're like, this is the family. What the sad part about that is that may not be reciprocated by, the actual employer, the owners of the company. They wouldn't do that shit for you.
Yeah.
The shit you would do for them because you thought, there's a difference there. And that's part of what I think is shitty about the idea of like anybody really using that like terminology anymore unless you mean it. Because, hey, Ben, he works for me. He could mean that. And he could like come get me out of jail and not tell anybody. But would I do that for him? And if you wouldn't do the shit, you just made the point, really. I'm just belaboring it. But like, if you wouldn't do the same thing you would do for your family, it's not fucking family. It's like it's a work, it's a work relationship.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's the other side of it too, of like, as an employer, if you think of everyone like family, then it's sometimes clouds your judgment to make the right decisions.
That's totally fair.
I was just listening to a episode of a VC podcast, forget the name of it, talking to the founder of Fast. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They recently had to like shut down operations after raising hundreds of millions of dollars, I believe, from Stripe. Their whole pitch was, we've got this better way of doing checkout. It's like single click checkout. Long story short, they were at a point where they were like, oh, we're growing too fast. We're running out of capital. And essentially the founder, I've heard mixed reactions from people. I knew a couple people that worked there, was like,
okay,
I want to hang on to the whole team as long as we can. But what it meant was that their runway went from what could have been 10 months to what ended up being like 2 months.
Yeah.
And it's all because it came down to this: I want to be liked by these people that I consider, quote, family. And I look at that as like, if you're a business person, is that the smartest move? If you're a leader of a team, like, what's a version of being accessible and respected by your team that doesn't become this?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's where I feel like you
have to make some tough calls, right? Like, I think to be truly objective as a leader, and even to the extent of like being kind to people, like, you should tell them. Like, this just goes to that honesty thing. Like, I think there's an important like balance you have to find for yourself.
Well, I think it even more so just continues to make the case for why nobody, uses that kind of terminology. Like, because if you're not truly, well, here's the problem though. Most, like, this guy's not the norm in that position. I think most of these, execs that are saying family bullshit are like, it works for them. It gets their employees feeling good and all that shit, and they get what they need out of it. But at the end of the day, they're probably not going to do what this guy did. But I do think that that's a good point. The reality is that no employer should treat their whole company like family, because, like you said, it clouds decision making. If I have to try to do something so my whole family can continue to thrive, that's too much. Yeah. So, I mean, like, it's just a bullshit term to be using these days, and I'm so, like, guilty of, like, using the shit out of it.
I mean, I think I've similar. I would extend it, though, to even just this idea of, like, we're all in this, like, cause that's bigger than ourselves. Like, elevating the work you do at a company for a job, for money. I think back to Sean Baugh, our old manager.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a job. This is literally the day, like, I think it's the day we had those layoffs, and I somehow like made the cut, and it was this like weird moment for me early in my career when he's like, "You're still here because you were better than them." I think it's the way he said it to me, and I was like,
Sean and I talked about that because you were like the most recent hire, I think.
Yeah, and it would have been an easy path, and I was like, oh, this is what it means. Like, there's like a decision that has to be made here, and it didn't have to do with like relationship, or didn't have to do with like anything else. It's like an interesting like balance you have to figure out, and that, to me, it's important as a leader to have that objectivity.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's super smart. Otherwise, you won't be a good leader.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's been some fun conversation, man. I think we could probably even go more down this rabbit hole, but
very, very well good.
But why don't we wrap it, man?
Yeah,
dude. Hey, thanks for being the first co-host. Bray's been out sick, trying to get well, and I thought maybe I could just swap you two out without anybody noticing.
No.
Yeah,
just the hair.
But yeah, the hair gave it away. Which I think I don't know if I mentioned it before, but like, dude, you're looking baller now. Like the beard being longer and like you going really like close on the shave.
It's the new signature look.
I love it, man. Tough
at
guy.
Almost 40, I think I found it.
Finally, only 40 years in. Well, dude, we'll have to catch up again soon. We got to talk woodworking because I built some benches. Sure. I'll send you some photos.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and they're the straightest benches I've ever made. I was pretty proud. I sent people photos of them. I was like, oh, look at these benches I made. They're like, who is this? But, well, dude, anything you want to tell the audience before we bounce?
No, it's good to be on here and excited to chat. I do have a podcast, believe it or not. It's still like a thing I'm doing.
So just to be clear, I was about to say that, and then that's why I said it all weird. Is there anything you'd like to tell the audience?
It's okay. It's okay. There are some great back episodes, the back catalog that you should listen to.
There is.
But yeah, more to come on that.
Yeah, just go subscribe, and eventually some shit will pop up in your in your playlist.
Go to I'veBeenThinking.com or BenHur.co would probably be an easier one to go to. BenHer.co.
Oh, because I've been is spelled like Ben.
Yeah, it's a different spelling. So the podcast is the I've Been Thinking podcast. But yeah.
All right,
check it out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother.
Absolutely.
Everybody, thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe and do all the shit. By the way, you have the most downloaded episode of all time. The one where
I'm honored
as a guest. Yeah. So I don't know. Let's see if we can beat that shit.
Thanks, y'all.
It's a challenge. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
See ya.